here's my answer. What makes a good book? It's actionable.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I heard a great sales analogy once. They said, be a surgeon with your words. Surgeons don't make extra cuts while performing surgery, right? It's unnecessary. Salespeople or effective writers shouldn't use extra language when selling or communicating. Be a surgeon with your words and be as actionable as possible. And so those are my recommendations. I think that, gone are the days where you need to write a 600-page book, kind of like you're describing, that has every case study, God known to man in there. Drive something home that's short, effective, and actionable, super packed with value. And yeah, I think that's how you write a good book, and that's how you write a good chapter like this.
So how do I so this is when I kicked off the conversation, I said, hey, I'm going to be selfish and curious at the same time. And hopefully that benefits so many listeners. But how do we retain? So the Elon Musk book I just listened to, I'm assuming when I go back and I read the Steve Jobs book, I believe Walter Isaacson was also the author.
He was. Mm-hmm.
And I read that book was thick. And I remember reading that. And I'm assuming the Elon Musk one, because it was 26 hours or 20 hours of listening on normal speed, I'm assuming it's a thick book. There you go. You actually have the hard. There it is.
I get all the hardcovers too. It is a thick book.
It's thick. So how do I
600 pages.
How do I retain and take away one or two or three significant or unique things out of a book like that to really help me take action in life?
All right, we're now opening up the can of worms, so I'm excited to dive in and be a little practical here. I'll tell a quick story. When I first started reading, I was always optimizing for the wrong thing. I thought that retention meant you could retain as much as possible from the book. All of these quotes and stats and stories and examples and case studies. And so while I was trying to retain as much as possible, I was also optimizing for some vanity metrics, like how many books could I read in a year? It went from 26 books, one every 2 weeks, to 52 books, one every week, to over 100 books, right? 2 books a week. And I was just kind of checking the books off the list. I read every word of every page and then boom, okay, I'm done, on to the next one. And then it was retention. I started meeting with this guy, Kevin Horsley, who wrote a book titled Unlimited Memory. Kevin has a fascinating story because he grew up with some learning disabilities and wanted to conquer them. So he started to study memory. And then he ended up winning this thing called the Everest of Memory Championships, where he memorized the first 10,000 digits of pi. And somebody would say, what's digit number 2,706? And he'd know it like that. And the next 5 digits, like crazy memory stuff. So I started to learn from him that if you become a little bit more selective with your retention, your ability to develop a relationship to that information strengthens. And so nowadays, when I read a book, I start by, this will be counterintuitive for the audio example of Elon Musk, but nowadays when I read a physical paper book, I start with setting a SMART goal. SMART, for anybody that's not familiar with it, watching or listening today, is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, meaning realistic, relevant, meaning you're emotionally connected to it, and T stands for time bound. You want a deadline for taking action. So instead of just opening up a book and hoping that it's going to change your life, you set a goal before you even start reading it. Let's say I was reading The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy for the first time. I would read the front cover, the back cover, a little bit of the Amazon description maybe, and then I would say, let's build a SMART goal. Something like find and implement at least 1 or 2 mindset strategies for compounding in my business by the end of November. So I'm baking action right into the goal. I'm looking to find and implement at least 1 or 2 strategies for leveraging the compound effect in my business by the end of November. It's specific, it's measurable, right? After you're done with the experience, did you implement at least 1 or 2 things? It's attainable. I didn't say like make $1 million by the end of the month, but just find or implement 1 or 2 things. I'm emotionally connected to it because I love my business and I love what I do and the people that I serve. And it's time bound. by the end of November. And so that's how I approach these books now. I'm not looking to retain tons of information, but I'm looking to take action on just a couple of things. And when you take action on something, you will retain it because it becomes part of your life. You strengthen that neural connection because you're really implementing something. So I guess if I was setting a goal like that, which I don't really do for biographies, but if I was setting a goal like that for this book, I would say find and implement at least 2 strategies for thinking bigger in my business by the end of November, something like that. And what I do with the SMART goal is I write it on the inside cover of the physical book. And I reread it every single time I read another chapter because I want to share my goal with the book so that it can share the information back with me. Our brains have this great filtering system called the reticular activating system, your brain's natural highlighter. And so when you tell your brain what to focus on, it will filter everything else out. And just those actions that you can implement into your business, that's all that's left. That's all you're going to see. And that's how you take better action. I'll kind of wrap this up by saying that 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. So by default, if you're only listening to something and you're multitasking because you're driving or you're working out or you're doing chores, you're at a disadvantage. So if I want to implement something from a book, I choose to read the physical paper book because it's multisensory. It's one focus at one time instead of multitasking, and I'm leveraging my visual input, which is the best way that you can build a relationship to information. If I'm listening to something, it's more for entertainment or context or to satisfy curiosity. Does all of that kind of track? I know that was a lot of info.
100% is. I mean, that is what I think about when I actually take the time to read a book. It's more intentional. You know, I'm carving out a couple hours and I'm going to give that couple hours. It's an appointment on my calendar like anything else because it's time that I need uninterrupted. It's that personal development time, and I take way more away from it. You know, I used to highlight, I used to, dog ear. I used to take, I'd go to the back of the book on extra pages or on the front cover and I'd write the page and the chapter and reference it. But I just found if I take the intentional time, if I just reflect a little bit back on each chapter, maybe that's your part of go back and read your goals and your intentions about the book. It helps me a ton. Read the chapter as it is, reflect on the chapter. It helps me a ton.
Yeah. And nowadays, kind of to follow through with that example, if I'm reading The Compound Effect or if I'm reading Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson, not only do I have the intention on the inside cover, but I try to actually separate reading and note-taking / reflection because I've read too many productivity books at this point to think that multitasking is okay, right? We all know it's sort of an inefficient use of our time.
Yep.
And so I realized maybe like a year or two ago that reading and note-taking are 2 completely separate activities. Reading is just this passive visual thing that you do, and note-taking involves a pen and paper, and you're kind of translating information, but we kind of lump them together. So what I do is I go through the book straight through, and if I see something that's related to my intention, I'll circle the page number, I'll bracket it off real quick, but I don't want to lose my reading momentum. And then I'll go through the book a second time, and I'll look for all of those pages that I circled in the areas that I bracketed off. And that's my time to sit with the information, reflect on it, and decide if I want to implement it. Because only once you have the full context of the book, from my opinion, do you know what the 1 or 2 things are that you want to implement. Because if you jump on page number 1, there might be something that has 100 times more leverage and might be a better fit for solving your problem on page 50. But now you're busy like working on something that's low leverage and isn't going to create a big impact. So that's the way that I like to do it.
That's awesome. See, we're sitting here learning. We don't have to read a book. We just come to class with Nick and we just learn.